Welcome back to A Bite from the Money Sandwich, where we provide practical and easy to understand tips and ideas on how to manage your money better, so as to let you retire with comfort and on your own terms. Why do so many Australians feel unprepared for retirement, even when they may be in a better position than they think? Today, I'm joined by Ben Hillier, Director Retirement at AMP. Ben speaks about AMP's Retirement Confidence Pulse Survey and why confidence, not just money, plays such a major role in retirement planning. Ben shares insights into the growing retirement confidence gap in Australia, the common mistakes people make with super, and why better education and engagement can dramatically improve retirement outcomes. Well, Ben Hillier from AMP, really appreciate your time on the show today. How are you going?
Excellent. How are you?
Well, no, it's a nice sunny day here in Sydney, so I'm very happy. Uh, One of the things I really like about AMP, and AMP is, I've been around 100 years. It's an amazing organization, and there's a lot of things that it does more than just superannuation or more than just insurance. And I think this Retirement Confidence Pulse survey that AMP is now doing is just a sort of an example of that. Can you give us a bit of background on first what it is and why AMP thought it'd be worthwhile having?
Yeah. Look, it's a 6 monthly survey that we're doing to gauge the confidence of Australians as they approach and experience retirement. We know that there's a retirement deficit in this country, unfortunately, and
Do you want to
and I say
explain retirement deficit a bit more?
it's a retirement confidence deficit, should I say? And
Right,
it's
confidence, yeah.
really, yeah, it's really because on average our poll shows that about 50% of Australians are confident about retirement. But but in reality, far more Australians actually ought to be confident. We know that people actually underestimate how much income they can get from their super, for example. They overestimate how much super they need. They are not aware of all the tips and tricks that you as a former advisor and author will know about how to
Mm.
maximize your retirement. And so as a result, people are worried about their money. Um, and so we've introduced this pulse, number one, just to keep a check on how we're tracking as Australians in terms of that confidence, but also to identify where's the specific areas of concern and where should we focus, so we can put our efforts in the right place in terms of education, financial literacy, awareness, and also solution support, guidance, and advice.
And I think also with COVID and our high interest rates, financial confidence is at an all-time low generally. But yes, especially when people think, well, I'm going to stop work. Will what I have last me for the rest of my life, which could be another 30, 40 years? So what's some of this data from your survey that was sort of stood out for you?
Yeah, like I said, the sort of the headline figure, it's a 50% pass rate, right? Which is not
Right.
that great. Um, but unfortunately, there is a big gender divide. And so that's our latest pulse was really digging into the gender differences. And so we've sort of got, roughly speaking, 60-40. So about 60% of men are confident, 40% of women, unfortunately, are confident. So that's a 50% gap just between the sexes there. And that really plays out as we look across the life stages. We looked at different ages, both pre-retirees, retirees, those who are single, those who are couples. You know, a lot of interesting themes play out when spouses separate, and unfortunately, women uh, tend to do worse off in terms of their confidence following those separations. So yeah, look, we sort of dug into a lot of things, and I think something that you've focused heavily on that sandwich generation, those who are supporting children and aging parents. That's probably the I don't want to say the sweet spot. What's obviously it's the bitter spot. So it's the worst possible place to be in for especially a single female looking after kids and aging parents is really, really quite terribly low levels of confidence.
Yeah, and we will talk about the education side of it because really a lot of this is just education, and we don't get taught this at school. We don't get taught this really during our working life either. So it's a really important one. Is it from what some of the data you're seeing that this is a perception from that survey that they're worse off, or actually financially they are worse off?
Yeah, look, I call it a deficit because for me, there's a gap between how confident they are and how confident they actually can afford to be, how confident they ought to be with, better awareness, better education, understanding, support from, from people like yourselves and ourselves and their financial advisors. And so, yes, absolutely. I think there's really, there's some simple things that can be done that actually don't require any more money for
Yep.
an individual, and then, of course, there's things that can be done over time to actually improve outcomes more broadly, with just better planning and forethought.
And I will get into the value of advice or the value of education, and because you know I have seen many a survey where it says people who advise going into retirement I feel far more confident, because it's sort of human nature. You don't know what you don't know, so if you don't understand super or this, well, you're going to be more anxious about it, and there is available help everywhere. You can, whether it's just from wanting self-learning or getting advice. um, One of the things I did find, and sorry, we'll get back to that, but one of the things I did want to do, because you're talking about the gender gap, and I think that's really important.
Mm.
I had a feeling that that might have slowly been that gap is reducing, but you're sort of saying from your survey that it's still fairly persistent.
Oh, look, to be honest, we've only just started focusing on that
Mhm.
that that gender from the AMP research, so I couldn't necessarily tell you what direction that's heading, that
Okay.
gap. We know that, the gap between super balances is closing. We know the gap between rates of pay, male, female, and depending how you measure that, but that is generally closed. But there's still quite a big gap in terms of confidence.
Yes, and also, and you mentioned before about that, especially divorce, and that a lot of women do feel, with whether it's just through education, financial education, because I must admit, from my last 10 years as an advisor, I had far more female clients than male clients in their 50s and 60s. And they're excellent. From an education point of view, they picked it up really quickly, but they just said, we never had access to this previously.
Yeah, and look, I think it's just, obviously society has changed over, certainly over the time you're an advisor and, last sort of 50 years. And so many of the clients that you would have been assisting into retirement would have grown up in very, very different times when, when the expectations and responsibilities of males and females was more clearly delineated, and yeah, just looking after the financial planning was less of a thing. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, back early in my career, I did some gender research, and this is back in when I was in banking. Actually, we actually asked males and females, who makes the financial decisions in your household, and and both sexes were saying, look, it's the male. But then we said, okay, think about the last financial product you acquired. Who made that decision? And it was actually the females, who
Okay.
who'd actually made the decision for the new home loan or the bank account or the credit card or something. And so there was a, even back then, a gap between the perceptions and the reality. Um, and so maybe females are just being a bit more humble and not really realizing how involved and how much value they are providing in those relationships.
Yeah, and you're right. These things are changing as well. And but one of the things that's not changing, and it was one of the things I really did find from being an advisor, being a coach, still around financial legacy. That was
Mm.
quite interesting. That for a lot of mothers, I want to make sure our adult children are looked after, especially if they're in a major city. How are we going to get them into the home? Not so much from the fathers. It was, we've got this retirement money, we're going to spend it and enjoy life. But there was that, and your research has also shown that more women have a stronger desire to leave a financial legacy.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it's a surprise to any of your listeners that on average, and I'll say on average, but I don't
On
get myself in
average.
trouble. But on average, females are more cognizant of their family's needs, are more, perhaps caring, can I say, and certainly have a stronger bequest motive to support their families after they've gone. I mean, it's not a massive gap. We're talking about it's about 66% of females have a strong sort of bequest motive from their super, for example, compared to about 57% for the blokes. But there's still a noticeable gap, and it does play out. Um, that sort of focus on family and extended family that does play out as we look at also the regard they have for their aging parents as well.
Yeah, and I think it was. I used to put it under those, keep me up at night moments. And if you, ask most mothers, what's to keep you up at night moment, it wasn't, uh, you know, do we have $1 million in the bank? It was,
Mhm.
one, will we have enough to live for our lifestyle, to be comfortable for our lifestyle for the rest of our lives? But secondly, yeah, absolutely, how do we help our children? That's, how do you help it? When I'm here in Sydney or Brisbane, but to buy your first home is just getting so further out of reach. So I get why that financial legacy, and I must admit, it's a conversation for another day. But with people living longer and they're living into the late 80s, 90s, well, your children could be retired before they receive this financial legacy. So we do need to think smarter how we can help our adult children before then. Um, One of the things that also was I noticed with this is that uh, you know we are, as an industry of the superannuation industry and the profession and advice profession, are trying to do that. What do you think is sort of how do you think we can do more? Do we need to be able to reduce the cost of getting that advice? Do we need to, I don't know, what's AMP's thinking about how as a super industry we could do better in helping women engage with their retirement planning?
Oh, look, there's a lot of answers to that question.
Yeah.
Certainly, a lot of things we're focusing on. Maybe I'll just sort of, well, I won't give you an exhaustive list. Um,
Mm.
yeah, perhaps starting at the top, though, we have a really complex system, um,
Yep.
and in fact, we'd improve literacy, we'd improve understanding, we'd actually reduce the need for advice, or maybe
Mm.
decrease the cost and complexity of advice if the system was just simpler. And so we would always call on governments, and we do play our part when sort of having a look at sort of reform for superannuation and financial services more broadly. Hey, look, are there opportunities to simplify things? To reduce the number of caps and differing tax rates, etc. They're all there for a reason. But if you started with a blank piece of paper, you certainly wouldn't end up where we are now. And I think that's just that complexity is a big part
Yeah.
of the problem.
And puts people
Except,
off, doesn't it? Just puts people off as well.
Correct, correct.
Mm.
Yeah. Stepping below that, look, um, a lot of super funds, so AMP, for example, we've got various levels of support, and technology is a wonderful thing to enabling us to do some really exciting things that previously we couldn't do, to be able to make advice just more accessible. Of course, we support financial advisors like you were in your former life, and they do a wonderful job. But the simple fact is that there's not enough of them to cover Australians, and because of the compliance burden on advisors, the cost of advice is a bit prohibitive for a lot of people, unfortunately. And so we've got over the phone free advice for members of the fund, like many super funds. We've also just recently launched our digital advice. So this is
Okay.
being able to interact with on your computer, on the phone, um, and get digital advice. It's high quality. It's limited in scope and purpose. It certainly doesn't replace a fully fledged financial advisor. It's not looking at your whole situation. It's on specific topics. Maybe you want to know how to invest your super. Maybe you want to know, how much insurance you should have. Maybe you want to know how you can transition from accumulation. You actually can get some digital advice at no charge. And that's a really good way, especially for some people who are actually quite embarrassed to front up to a person, to an advisor, and fess up, look, I haven't been paying attention. I don't actually know where my, where my, even how much super I have or where it's at, or all sorts of
Or
sort of
how many super funds
unusual
they may
questions.
have?
Correct, and so it's just a good way of starting. And look, there's also government services, so the Money Smart website. There's calculators and tools and information fact sheets about various superannuation topics. You can have a look at how much income you could be projected to have at retirement. So you using either your super fund, or if you just want to go onto that government's Money Smart website, there is a lot of information available. Probably the simplest thing is just start.
Yeah. I think exactly right. Just start. And to give, I just read this incredible stat a while back where there's roughly a 3 million over 65s in Australia who have superannuation, and nearly half of them still haven't switched off their 15% tax. They're still paying tax over the age of 65. Some may because they're still working, but the majority just don't need to pay tax. So with just spending a little bit of time on self-education or going seeing a financial advisor or coach, it just can make such a difference. And I remember when part of the association, we definitely tried to lobby government on that retirement. You only get a chance to retire once. So, it should be nearly a compulsory, yep, before you retire, you need to have some type of advice, because most people just retire and they just don't know what they don't know.
That's right. I interviewed a couple once. I've interviewed thousands of retirees and pre-retirees in my work, and interviewed a couple once, and they were teachers, you know, long term in the government system. Um, they had absolutely no idea about retirement. They had no idea how much super they had. They were terrified. They said, "Look, we don't have enough." I said, "How much do you have?" "Well, we don't know." And I looked them up afterwards. They actually had $1 million between them in DB funds, in defined benefits, that they just had no idea because they hadn't engaged. And of course, they were very fortunate. Not everyone who's listening is just going to go and find sort of hidden treasures like that. But nonetheless, a lot of people can be better off than they think they are if they just have a look at what they've got, and look at ways to optimize those assets.
And I think further to that, because it really is, yes, a good starting point is actually know your account balance, but it's also important as well to have your funds working hard for you. I know there was definitely a perception uh, 10, 20, 30 years ago, once we get close to retirement, well, we need to have our money secure, conservatively invested. But that was if you were thinking of living another 10 years. If you're now thinking of living another 20, 30 years on average, we need to get our money continually working harder for us, and taking a bit of interest on how it's invested, how it can be invested in retirement is also still very important.
I think something that people find quite surprising the first time they hear it is what's called the 10-30-60 rule. That was developed, I think, in the 80s by a guy called Don Ezra at Russell Investments. And he calculated that for every dollar you spend in retirement, only 10%, only 10 cents should actually come from your contributions to your super, for example. Only 10%. 30%, so 30 cents in the dollar, comes from the earnings, the investment earnings on those contributions during your working life. But that still leaves 60% of money you spend in retirement is money that you didn't have when you retired. It's the investment earnings on your super during the period of retirement. So most of the money you spend in retirement should be money you didn't have when you retire. That's quite surprising, but it's only possible if, like you were just saying, you invest through retirement, not just to retirement. But you need to be, taking on a moderate amount of investment risk so that you've actually got that growth exposure all the way through, like you said before, what could be 30 or even 40 years.
Yeah, and I'm glad you explained that, the 10-30-60 rule, because I think to the average person, yeah, retiree, they would not even comprehend. If they had to make a guess, they maybe say, oh, well, once I retire, maybe 10% is what that, not 60%. So it really is important. Yeah, we don't want to just stick it in a bank account. We don't want to pull it out of superannuation even. I know too many people I spoke to used to say, oh, well, once we retire, we'll pull our money out of super and put it in a bank account. And I'm thinking, why do you want to take it from a tax-free regime to a taxable regime and reduce your interest rate by half? So I get that, and uh, they're the sort of, as you said, from your pulse, that the anxiety levels are higher, and it's just viewed just from a bit of coaching, a bit of education. It's amazing what could be done. Um, what do you sort of say? Okay, I get retirees or pre-retirees, and that's an important part of this confidence pulse, retirement confidence pulse. But really, from an AMP position, you could have AMP your entire life. So, we can start this message earlier, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, however, the greatest strength of superannuation is also its greatest weakness. The greatest strength is that it's compulsory, um, and preserved. And so, that means that people start contributing to their super, basically from their very first job, and they got no choice about it, and that's wonderful because it builds up, one of the largest per capita pots of pension savings in the world.
Mm.
But that's also one of the greatest weaknesses because it's compulsory and preserved. It reduces engagement, and so people actually don't have to think, "Oh, like, I've got to prepare for my retirement. It's coming. It's 10 years away, 20, whatever it is." And so they don't think about it and they don't engage. And so they may not be investing where they ought to be. They may not have the right cover that they might, or they may have got too much cover. There's if you don't pay attention,
Mm.
just the settings might not be quite right for your situation. And so, yeah, it's never too early to start. It's also never too late to start, by the
Mhm.
way. And I want to get that message across too. Some people like that couple I talked about. Hey, look, they left it late, but whatever if you the right time to start is now. If you haven't already started, we've recently turned on some things that just help people in the accumulation phase, even if they're not aware of it. So some of your listeners might be aware there's a new class of retirement income streams available. They're called innovative retirement income streams. They let your superannuation basically provide income no matter how long you live and no matter how long your spouse lives. And they have great Centrelink concessions. If you put whatever money you put into these things, reduces your assessable assets. So it actually increase your age pension eligibility. But by um, the way we've done it with AMP, we've actually created an allocation to one of these lifetime income streams, even in the accumulation phase in the super space. You're not locked in. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't impact your investment earnings. It doesn't restrict your investment choice, but it just simply further reduces your assessable Centrelink assets test. And so that when people do pay attention, they'll actually say, hey, look, I've actually improved my situation in the background without having to pay attention to it. And so just sort of having a look at some of those sorts of opportunities is a great way. It doesn't cost you anything, doesn't restrict your choice, but it just can lead to much better outcomes. We're talking about, on average, about $100,000 extra income in retirement from turning on this strategy during the accumulation phase.
Okay, so would more information about this be on your website?
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. We turned it on just last year, and so a lot of the AMP members already get sort of
Mhm.
automatically defaulted into it. Our default My Super members can opt in, but yeah, it's on our website. But effectively, if someone's listening and they were not an AMP member, if they simply joined on the website, they'd get this automatically.
Brilliant.
That doesn't
Okay.
yeah, that it doesn't matter what investment choice they make. It's just turned on in the background, and it just simply says, "Hey, look, when I get to retirement, I might have $500,000 of assets, but perhaps only 200,000 or 300,000 would be assessed under the assets test, which can add up to some significant savings."
Yeah, and I think this is an important part of the retirement process that people, they've for a lot of people still, for my kids, there will be no worrying about the government pension because I don't think it will be there. But right now, it is really important, and there is the assets and income test, and what AMP and a number of other companies are doing, they are introducing these innovative income streams because most people think, oh, I've got this lump sum in super, I just have to draw down. But no, you can put a certain amount of it into an income stream and get that, just like you had at work, once a month payment, it comes in every month, but it also can be very tax effective to help you get the max out of your pension, government pension, if you qualify. So again, why you should get advice. It's so, so important.
That's right. I mean, you referenced at the start there, so that AMP's history, right? I mean, it's 177 years old now. Um, but can you believe back in 1849 we had three products for sale? I wasn't there, but I've looked it up. um, but one of those products, so we had life insurance, as you'd expect.
Mhm.
We had child endowments, but we also had effectively what we just relaunched. It's something you contribute to during your working life, monthly, weekly, or whatever you like. And when you retire, it pays income for life. Never runs out. Back then, it started paying income at age 50 because that was past life expectancy. Um, But so it's in our history and DNA, and it's really important to give people the confidence. With something fascinating we've seen about confidence in the last 3 years since we launched our lifetime income solutions is those of our members who have a lifetime income stream. Can you believe they are spending 60% more than equivalent members who don't have those solutions? Because they've overcome the fear of running out, and they are now confident to just spend their own money. Plus, they get some extra age pension on the side.
Gee, 60%.
Yeah,
That's yeah, yeah.
staggering.
Incredible, incredible. But it just sort of shows, you know, on your own, if you're going to put a pool in your backyard, you're not going to do it. And I put it to the same thing. Well, this is your superannuation. This is, you want to maximize this for all your benefits. So, go get, or if you don't want to, if you want to do the educational coaching yourself, or so the self-education, but just go get some advice. It'll save you, just as you said, 60%. And that's really, people who are, whether they're single coming into retirement, whether divorced or they're just single, or married couples. I used to have people who'd say, "Oh, I want to have $1 million, I want $2 million, or whatever the figure was." Now it's more along just as your Pulse survey is showing. Just will I have enough to survive? Will I have enough for my lifetime? Health wise, we're living longer, but financially, will my money be able to keep up? So it really is worthwhile. So I really appreciate, work like AMP and others are doing in this space, in the retirement space, because there's just so many people now, more people retiring every day, and we need to sort of make sure people retire as comfortably and as secure as possible. Okay, so no, thank you, Ben, for your time. I'd be very interested to see how this pulse goes, and confidence pulse, because I really, it's in everyone's interest that people's anxiety levels around their retirement is improved or lessened. So anything we can do to help that, which like some of the suggestions you've helped here. So I appreciate your time. One of the things I always ask our guest is, say, what's the very best piece of advice they've ever received, financial or otherwise, from their parent or from a mentor or anything?
Probably one of the best bits of advice I got was from my father when I was a kid. He talked about an old school saying, inch by inch, it's a cinch, yard by yard, it's hard. I think talking to the value of just incremental changes can make a bigger impact over a long period of time.
Love it. Yeah, that really is important. Yeah. For a lot of people, they think, oh, it's such a big step. Man, just take a little step, take an incremental, just get started, basically, as you said earlier in the show. Um, Ben, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. And I really appreciate what the work AMP are doing for the retirees, Australia, especially now on the gender gap. And anything we can do to improve that is important. So again, thank you very much for your time to here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to learn more about Ben Hillier and AMP, you can visit their website at www.amp.com.au, or feel free to reach out to me at admin@themoneysandwich.com or visit themoneysandwich.com if you have any questions or would like to learn more. Visit my website, themoneysandwich.com, for free templates, online calculators, and subscribe to our newsletter to help you now for a better retirement tomorrow. As with every podcast, this information is not advice, as not personalised to your own situation, and past performance is never guaranteed for the future. What we are trying to do here is to provide tips, coaching, and education to help improve your money knowledge, which we believe can only be a good thing. See you next time when we take another bite from the Money Sandwich.